watching Asia Now here on CNE, and it's time for your business update with Pamela Ambler.
Thanks, Alekia. U.S. President Joe Biden has called on some of the world's largest oil companies, consuming nations, to consider releasing some of their crude reserves to help lower energy costs. The Biden administration raised the issue with several close allies, including Japan. Earlier this week, President Biden similarly discussed the matter with China's President Xi Jinping during their virtual summit. The orchestrated moves are seen as a pushback against OPEC over expensive crude oil. The cartel and their allies, including Russia, have previously resisted calls from Biden to speed up the rate of their supply increases. But the fight doesn't stop there for the U.S. president, as he aims to lower prices. On Wednesday, he called on the Federal Trade Commission to investigate whether oil and gas companies are colluding illegally to keep gasoline prices high. Mr. Biden says a growing gap between the cost of unfinished gas and what consumers are paying at the pump is taking a hit on U.S. households. Meanwhile, oil giants are generating significant profits. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, gasoline prices were up more than 60% on year in mid-November. It was the highest level since 2014. Higher energy costs have also contributed to rising U.S. inflation, which hit a three-decade high in October. Many analysts attributed the higher gasoline prices to the uptick in global activity as economies reopen, but supply has not kept pace with demand. Some believe the rising COVID-19 cases in Europe could dampen prices amid fears of downside risks to demand recovery. As the Biden administration fights to lower oil prices, one analyst tells us more needs to be done to sort out domestic supply in the U.S.
Yeah, I think part of the issue in the U.S. with crude oil is the Biden administration restrictions on pipelines and on the supply side in the U.S. So Joe Biden is asking other countries, Russia, Saudi Arabia, other OPEC members, to supply more oil, yet he's restricting the supply, domestic supply in the U.S. So I think what's happening with those other suppliers, they have customers who are buying their crude oil. They don't necessarily want to have to produce more because they want slightly higher prices. They don't want things too high, but they want slightly higher prices. And so they're pushing back on Joe Biden saying, look, you really need to look at your own domestic supply. You really need to look at those issues yourself before we start to open up our own markets. So, the current administration is trying to have it both ways. They're trying to restrict supply within the U.S. They're trying to bring in more supply from overseas. Americans see this and they understand kind of the incongruent nature of that argument from the administration.
Oil is under pressure in Asian trade, adding to the plunge in the U.S. overnight. Brent right now is trading below $80 a barrel, and WTI is down by 0.7%. South Korea says they are reviewing a U.S. request to release oil reserves in response to surging energy prices. Seoul says they could release reserves if there's a supply imbalance, but not as a response to rising oil prices.